approve the minutes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. Yes. Yay.
All
Yeah.
minutes, is that like
Yes.
Yes. It's like it's like
Yes. So, welcome to the public meeting of the New York City Voter Assistance Advisory Committee. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from December, February, April, June, August, and October. Okay. So, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Second?
second?
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. Yay. Okay. And the second item is the report of the committee chair. That is me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for discussions tonight about early voting and how it will affect voter engagements in 2020 and beyond. Last month, New Yorkers got their first taste of early voting, and I'm pleased to say that more than 60,000 city voters took advantage of the opportunity to cast a ballot early. Overall, well over 700,000 New York City voters cast a ballot in the 2019 general election. Given the tight timeline between the passage of early voting earlier this year and the general election, the Board of Elections did an excellent job administering this new process. There have been discussions and hearings about how to improve early voting in future elections. Given that turnout in 2020 will likely be far higher than what we saw in November, this was a good opportunity to work out the kinks. I think there is broad agreement that we would like to see many more early voting sites available beginning in April than we saw this fall. For tonight's meeting, we are hoping to hear from community and voting advocates to learn how early voting changed your work in 2019 and learn some of the best practices around the subject going forward. NYC Votes is planning for ambitious programs to empower voters, particularly naturalized citizens and youth voters, so we are eager to have this discussion with you. And with that, I will turn it over to Executive Director Amy Loprest for her report.
So, good evening. Welcome, everyone. As the chair mentioned, there was a big turnout in early voting, and one of the big passages items that was passed in this past election was the new ranked choice voting. And so that will be implemented starting in 2021. And the board is looking at ways to start thinking about our mandate from the Charter Revision Commission to educate people about ranked choice voting. But it's an important issue. One thing that happened in this election was that following the election, the board asked the city council to close a gap in the city's disclosure requirements for municipal ballot initiatives. The current law covering groups that spend money supporting or opposing ballot initiatives does not require them to disclose their contributors to the CFB. Current law also does not require the groups to include the pay forward by notice as required for other independent expenditures directed at candidate campaigns. Independent expenditure notices must list the name of the top 3 contributors to the group and directs people who receive those voters who receive those materials to go to nyc.gov/follow the money to learn more about who is contributing towards those independent expenditure initiatives. None of those disclosure requirements are required for spending on municipal ballot initiatives. We issued a press release urging the city council to amend what is already one of the country's strongest disclosure laws to include this information. And I'm happy to report that Councilmember Brad Lander plans to introduce legislation on this matter, and we urge him and the council to pass that legislation and fix these gaps in our important disclosure.
Thank you. And the next item on our agenda is
It's very small.
It is the report from Public Affairs.
Good evening. committee and members of the public.
You need to turn the microphones on.
Let's try that again. Good evening, members of the committee and members of the public who've joined us today. My name is Eric Friedman. I'm Assistant Executive Director for Public Affairs here at the Campaign Finance Board. With me is Amanda Malillo, who's Deputy Director of Public Affairs. I want to talk a little bit about some of the outreach work we did around last month's election and talk about some of the work we've got coming up ahead for us in 2020. As the chair mentioned at the start, this was the first election we've had with early voting. This was a long time coming, and it was a very exciting moment for us all. A few of the things we did differently for this election, we featured prominently on the cover of a voter guide that went to every household with the registered voter in New York City. More than 5 million voters received a voter guide that gave them information about early voting and the dates and where they could go to find more information. Amy mentioned the ballot questions a little earlier. The guide contained comprehensive information on not just the candidates, but on the 5 ballot questions proposed by the Charter Revision Commission. Our online voter guide contained all that information plus pro and con statements that we received from members of the public. More than 400,000 New Yorkers visited that online voter guide in the days leading up to the election. We did a lot of outreach leading up to the election on social media. Our Twitter handle at NYC Votes earned more than 3 million impressions in the days leading up to the election, and mentioned by other users close to 750 times. We've seen growth on each of our other platforms, on Instagram, on Facebook. Our campaigns on social media helped drive about 150,000 visitors to voting.nyc, which was our online platform that helped drive New Yorkers into the information in the voter guide. And about roughly a quarter of the traffic that came to our online voter guide came through that voting.nyc portal. We continued our outreach to voters via email and text message. Close to 9,000 voters received our email reminders leading up to last month's election. Close to 5,000 people received text reminders. So I want to just call in thanks to Chase Gilbert and all the folks in public affairs who helped with the social media campaign, and Amanda and the other staff that worked on our email and text alerts. We also do work with other city agencies to help get the word out about elections. There were a number of city agencies that featured our voter spotlights prominently on their homepages leading up to the election. We had a partnership for the first time with Uber and Lyft, which we convinced to offer free rides to the polls for early voting. Sorry, it was discounted rides, not free rides, discounted. My apologies. I don't want to raise expectations for next time. And I want to thanks to Matthew Pitt and the partnerships and outreach team for their work on that. We also continued our phone banks, nonpartisan get out the vote phone banks that we've been conducting previous to the election. We had to keep it open for longer for early voting than we have in previous election days. We had 8 days of calling here in this room, made over 8,200 calls, more than 2,100 conversations, a really good contact rate of over 25%. We had 184 volunteers from 9 organizations join us here for this phone banks, which I think is really, really remarkable. We've been able to build this program out over the years, and really thanks to Sean and the partnership and outreach, Sean O'Leary and the partnerships and outreach team that and everybody around the agency that really pitches in to help us with that. Looking ahead to 2020 and 2021, I think everybody here kind of understands, the sort of the magnitude of elections that we've got coming up over the next couple of years. We are hard at work right now putting in place the first building blocks of the 2 major campaigns that we've rolled out to take us through 2020 and 2021 to increase immigrant voter engagement. We're calling it 20K in 2020 initiative to register 20,000 voters in new naturalized citizens in neighborhoods with particularly low voter turnout across the city, and to double youth voter turnout in 2021. So to start, we are beginning to build out a set of community profiles to make more voting and voter participation data by neighborhood available to advocates and to community groups, starting with those target neighborhoods I mentioned a moment ago. We're working with SOZE, which is an agency that specializes in youth civic engagement, to build a strategy that'll help us put together programming around that youth turnout goal I mentioned a minute ago. We're talking with CUNY to plan a youth summit for later this winter to build a plan to register and mobilize students across all of their campuses, which is really a great start for that youth turnout goal. And we're planning days of action in the early spring to kick off that 20K in 2020 campaign to register and mobilize immigrants, naturalized citizens, some of those low turnout neighborhoods I mentioned. We've also been speaking with legislators as we get ready in the coming weeks, next month, to start the new legislative session in Albany, to build support for legislation that will hopefully finally enable the online voter registration platform that we've built here. And we've been talking to folks who are eager to help us do that. And just the last bit to mention, in the coming weeks, we will be welcoming a new director of policy and research and start work on the voter assistance report, which is due to be published in April. A lot of that will depend on a look at some of the results in this last election. We got a lot to kind of chew on with early voting, and I want to turn to Amanda for a moment to start to talk about some of the observations we've been able to glean from early voting.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I'm Amanda Melillo. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Affairs here at the Campaign Finance Board. I will say, unfortunately, there is currently not a lot of data publicly available about how early voting was used. The Board of Elections has published basically the number of voters who went to participate in early voting by borough for each day. But when they published their certified election results, they did not break out by election district how many people had cast their ballots early. So as Eric mentioned, we are now starting to turn to our annual report that we will release next spring. And we're going to see what data we can obtain from the Board of Elections in order to do a fuller analysis of where early voting was used. And are there lessons we can draw from that, either in terms of where poll sites are located, how communities are using this, where people are turning out? Because I think that with the data that we know is available, there are a lot of lessons we can draw, both in terms of how to do election administration and also how to mobilize communities around this. So what I can talk about today is really that high-level view of the election. And actually, turnout in the 2019 election was almost 3 times as high as it was in the last comparable election back in 2015, where only 6% of the city's voters turned out. In the 2019 election, the turnout rate was 16.8%. So this is really consistent with that spike we've been seeing over this 4-year election cycle, with more people turning out to elections that had historically been very low turnout elections. Overall, about 7.6% of voters went to cast their ballots early, of all of those who actually went to go vote. As was the case in a lot of other states, this last Sunday of early voting before Election Day was the highest usage day, where almost 20% of early voters had gone to vote that Sunday. So that's really in line with what you see around the country, where people particularly mobilize on that weekend before Election Day, and that weekend early voting has actually been shown to increase turnout in a way that early voting on its own does not. Other than that, a takeaway is that during the week of early voting on weekdays, the Board of Elections was required to have poll sites open for hours outside of normal business hours. So for 2 days of that week, poll sites were open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Those tended to see more people casting their ballots on those days than when poll sites were open from 9 to 5. So I think that speaks to the need to have this flexibility and give people more opportunities to vote. In terms of where we know early voting was used, Manhattan had like the highest usage borough, where 10.27% of early voter people cast their ballots early, whereas the Bronx had the lowest usage of only 5% of voters. So that's certainly something we would like to look at once we get more comprehensive and detailed data to look at, are there reasons why this may have occurred? Are there areas of the city where people were just turning out to vote more, whether that was by neighborhood or by poll site or something like that? And I'm perfectly happy to take any questions.
So which percentage voted early again?
So overall, 7.6% of people cast their ballots early, which people ask me about like expectations for early voting this time around. I wouldn't say people had any expectations, but I think this is actually pretty good for a first go round. If you want to compare to numbers nationally in 2018, about 22% of people cast their ballots in person, early voting. Around the country, that's had it much longer. In the 2014 midterm election cycle, only about 10.7% had gone to vote early. So we're like almost there in our first time around. And I really do anticipate seeing a lot more people use it in the 2020 presidential elections.
I had a quick question about the social media engagement. And also what you just said about the Bronx being one of the lowest turnout communities. Was the social media engagement also done in other languages outside of English, or was it primarily English and Spanish? 7 languages of 10?
I'm looking to the back of the room. I know we did some in Spanish. I don't. Early voting promotions were in English and Spanish, but the day-to-day engagement was only
For translation?
Yeah. So that's something we have been looking into of like how, given our rapid turnaround needs, how can we like work other languages into that workflow, particularly not just on social media, but also email. But yeah, we had a PSA for early voting to let people know it was available, and that was available in English and Spanish.
I'll just add to that. I think one of the assumptions that we take into our planning around the campaign to build engagement and turnout in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods is that we're going to need to do more in languages other than just English and Spanish. I can't say that I can't talk about what our plans are just yet because we're really just getting started. But it is one of the assumptions we're bringing into this work that in order to get where we're going, we are going to need to make more of our information available to more people who have limited English proficiency.
Okay. And just a second question. You spoke about the 9,000 emails, the 5,000 text reminders, and the 3 million impressions on social media. Is there any way to see if the conversion between those who, were emailed, texts, and those who actually turned out at the polls?
That's something we won't be able to find out for a little while, but it is something we do look into. We have found that, based on the studies of our text and email list, where we have their information, we're able to match them to the voter file. Our list tends to be highly engaged. They tend to have turnout rates higher than the city overall. One of the things we're looking into is, does that mean they're more likely to sign up with us because they were engaged? And are they in fact the people we most need to be reaching? Because as we, really start to shift our efforts and focus on these lower turnout areas in the city, it's possible we may need to rethink some of our digital outreach strategies based on that. If the audiences we're trying to reach are not actually the audiences that we are reaching.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. Well, first of all, everybody in I live on the Upper West Side, and everybody in my neighborhood loved early voting. I have a question about what you said about reaching out to newly naturalized citizens. I actually went with a friend of mine when she became a citizen, and the judge, this is all in federal court, so it's a federal district judge, actually said the most important thing you can do right now is go out and register to vote. And it just so happens there's a table outside with registration forms. And I was wondering if that is something that could be coordinated and staffed by volunteers or something like that, so that whenever there are federal court proceedings where people are naturalized, it would be great to have us be there. You're looking at me like you already do this, maybe.
We do.
You got that. We certainly have for a long time staffed tables outside naturalizations to register newly naturalized citizens on the way out. Sabrina can talk a little bit more about how frequently we're there and or have been.
Yeah, and I can also talk about that if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Yes, and Eddie has been a longtime partner in that, and we work at Federal Plaza with Dominicanos, where we go every Friday to naturalization ceremonies. We've been a little more limited in what we've been able to do in Brooklyn or Queens, because going to naturalization ceremonies requires working with the Department of Homeland Security and getting permission to be there. We are lucky in that we've had a long-standing relationship, and we have still been able to get into naturalization ceremonies. We have talked to groups that cover the Brooklyn courts, for example, and are always looking for ways to work with community groups to continue this work. But one thing I do just want to note, because this is something we were talking about earlier, in our annual report this year, we're going to be releasing really exciting research. One of our staff members, our data manager, has been putting together a very long-term statistical study of voter participation in New York. So she has assigned a voter participation score to every single voter in the voter file, looking at elections from 2008 to 2018. How many elections were people eligible to participate in, and how many did they actually participate in? And from there, we're looking at the participation patterns at the census tract level to see what are the demographic factors that are impacting turnout, that are either raising it or lowering it. So one of the reasons we're really focused on areas with high rates of naturalized citizens is because this is consistently a factor that's been shown to bring down neighborhood turnout. So we have the experience of when we're at naturalization ceremonies, people who register to vote are excited. And once you get them to register, you pretty much have them as a voter. But there's still some disconnect happening where these areas of high naturalized citizens do have higher rates of unregistered voters, and they have lower rates of turnout than other comparable neighborhoods. So that's one of the reasons we're really focusing in these areas. And part of the work we're going to be doing through outreach over the next few months is starting to learn where that disconnect is happening. What is it that's causing people to feel like they're not part of this process, or like this is not a way to exercise their voice through elections?
And
I have a question. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a
No,
follow.
you can.
I'll just finish. I'll be fast. I know that we don't have anything to do with the tablets that are used, but I was wondering if there's a way, please, to communicate to the Board of Elections that they need to do even more training on the tablets, and that several training sessions per poll worker would be really great.
I'm sure that is something we can communicate to them.
Thank you.
I have a question that early voting started, community should be more involvement, faith leaders, a mosque, Senegalese, and the church. Saturday has a much more people. Friday has over 1,000 people in the mosque. And temple has Sunday. Those are the days if faith leaders knows that early voting is coming. Next week is early voting. Because every event, even Friday, even Saturday, they can speak on behalf their started Salat or any prayer start before. They can say, tomorrow you start early voting. Choose your side. I think that should be the most priority to engage faith leaders to be involvement, which Max already said that social media, which I already discussed, that social media wants to heavily interested to involve with the Board of Election. They have a question, what is they can start it to action, how they can engage, and how they can find out their polling site. Those are the things they have a question. Because even though this year, though it started, I took a couple of people for early voting because I know they cannot vote next day. These are because I know. Even a couple of business society, Jackson Heights, Chas McDonald, Brooklyn, those are the people does not know early voting. They even did not hear that. How we can engage business society, largest business society in the New York City, South Asian, and Nepali, and many other. We should be involved with them. I think I can help. Everybody can help each other to bringing those people to the ground. Thank you.
I'll have two comments just to respond. One, I think the idea of engaging kind of places of worship to help organize people and get them to early voting is something I think we've heard in a couple places that we've been around talking to folks, soliciting feedback and asking for ideas from elected officials and other organizations around the city. I think, again, with the ability to vote on the weekends, it's something that makes a lot of sense. And so I just want to kind of align myself with that comment. The other, I just think that, again, I think that a lot of people were out in this past election trying to get the word out about early voting. I'll say one of the core assumptions we bring to our strategy and our work over the next 2 years is there's going to be a lot of natural interest around the elections next year. I don't think we're going to have to work to get people interested because a lot of people are going to be watching to see what happens. A lot of people are going to want to be heard. Next year is really our time to kind of grab people once we have their attention and get them as much information as we can. And so I think we've got some great opportunities next year and that we are looking to build those connections with voters all over the city. They're going to help. It's going to help lift engagement and participation in 2021, which is a crucial and enormous election year for city government, as I know you all know.
Is poll site data information that we have available yet, or are we going to be getting that? How much?
So what we usually do to analyze turnout is we obtain a copy of the voter file. And we can tell from that who actually went to participate in elections. And from there, like a next step we could do is looking at it by election day poll sites. What the Board of Elections said they are not going to do is indicate who voted early versus who voted on election day. So we won't be able to tell that in the voter file itself. The Board of Elections does have data on how many people checked in at each poll site during the early voting period. That's just not something that's been made publicly available yet, but we are looking for ways to obtain that.
So they have information about number of people at each poll site separate from just the voter who actually voted.
Right. So, I'll use my example of I voted that last Sunday of early voting. Went and I signed in on the tablets, and they have like a count of how many people actually went to go sign in at each early voting site. And that's really because they know who's signing in. They should be able to break that data down into like what election districts are those people coming from. Because I can tell you, like, I had a very accessible early voting site because it was the same as my election day poll site, and it was like across 8th Avenue from me. So it was really not going out of my way at all to go vote early. Whereas I did hear from other people of, oh, my early voting poll site is located off a train line I would never use, or it's in a direction that would take me totally out of the way. And if we had that data available, we could really be studying sort of like, what are those patterns? Were there people who weren't participating because their poll sites were inconveniently located, or they were on transit lines that weren't their typical transit lines, or things like that?
I mean, we had that conversation earlier on about like being able to have mobile or kind of like anywhere voting.
Yes.
But if we find that like poll sites are advantaging some election districts over another, I mean, that's a concern.
Right.
Right.
And we do understand that the Board of Elections, as part of administering early voting, it's a challenge to find sites that will agree to be poll sites. We certainly heard many stories about issues happening with the schools and parents of students being unhappy with that. Sites than other voters in different parts of the city. And that's something we really want to look at.
You have another question?
Okay.
Sure.
Especially related to what you were just talking about. And perhaps there are security reasons that this doesn't work. But a lot of people, I'm sure, would want to vote near their offices. And if we're doing everything by tablet, what's the difference?
Yes.
So, I mean, I even see Javits full of tablets, something like that, where it might be less. And I'm not asking you about this. I'm just saying that it does seem like if you're using a computer.
I mean, what the Board of Elections has consistently said publicly is, they talk to people in a lot of other jurisdictions, and they got a lot of advice about how to implement early voting for the first time. And what I think their takeaway was from these conversations, keep it simple the first time around, build on it later. So that's why, you may remember in the spring, we had a meeting with advocates. We made a number of recommendations to the Board of Elections about how we wanted to see early voting implemented. And that idea of vote centers was a critical part of how we wanted to see this done. So what they have sort of said publicly is we went with an assigned poll site now. That's not necessarily how we will always do it. We will look to moving towards a more vote center model in the future. Although recently there have been indications they might make it borough only as opposed to citywide because of the way they feel the law was written with certain limitations based on county. There are various interpretations of whether or not that is the case. I think there are plenty of people who feel that the law was not written in a way that would prohibit citywide voting, especially because with tablets, with ballot on demand, there's no reason this can't be done. But I do think we are going to move in that direction and at least in a borough-wide way, which will not really convenience people who work in a different borough, as many of us in this room do. But I think that's like the long-term plan.
And back to the accessibility point, do we have information on how the Uber and Lyft partnership worked as far as like people that used it or?
So I think we have numbers from Lyft, and so what I can say is there were 80 people who downloaded. There's a code that you download through the app, and 50 people used it. I don't know that we have numbers from Uber, but so that's what we can say about it.
How much of a discount did they offer?
I think it was 50% off, like for rides up to I think it was $10. I can't remember. One of my friends used it, was like very excited to do so. It's like, oh, half off rides.
I think both they and we kind of promoted, put it into our social media platforms. Right. I don't know that we spent money to promote it, but I think it's a good response just based on that kind of organic.
Yeah, and for us, I think it was like an interesting pilot project sort of with how we can do these public-private partnerships to engage companies to get more active in sort of civic life and to help people actually participate in the elections process.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think we, for sure, took this first time out with early voting as a time to try some things out and learn about the things we'll need to build going into next year, and so.
What is the review process or the kind of adjustment process? Are they looking to make changes for next year, or is it kind of the way through a cycle? Like how long would the Board of Election take to make any adjustments?
That is an excellent question. I do not have the answer to. I mean, I do know there's been some indication because originally, I think they had 37 poll sites when they first rolled out early voting. They eventually increased it to 61. There has been some acknowledgement that will probably not be enough in the presidential year when we're going to see far more voters, far more people who want to vote early, and that number of sites will need to scale up. But as for the timeline that is going to work on, I'm not totally sure about that.
I have another quick question. I know you said you haven't mined the data yet from the 2019 election, but I'm just still shocked because you said it was 3 times the amount of 2015. Are you able to see at all where the surge in participation came from?
Once we get the voter file, yes, we will be able to see that. And I can say in general, we've seen this pattern in elections in 2018 and now 2019, and it is happening across the board. I would say I don't think there's a single neighborhood that hasn't gone up to some degree. Of course, some neighborhoods have gone up more than others, and that's something we can look into.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
That was agenda items 4 and 5,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So now we are ready for public testimony.
Okay. So. Not 100%. Okay. I'm reading this. Took me a second. So we have a number of people who have signed up to testify. So we'll take those people first, and then we'll open it to anyone else who wants to speak. The first person is Eleanor Qualo. Is that, did I pronounce your name correctly? Thank you.
Good evening.
Okay, good evening, board. Good evening, participants. Okay, my name is Eleanor Coelho, and
This one works better. I'm just guessing.
okay, and so we were a part of our social action committee. We advocated for the early voting to Governor Cuomo. So we were, of course, excited when early voting was passed. However, we did a little survey of our members who voted, and we found a little bit of pro and cons. One of the things that they talk about was it was not convenient, or the site was too far away. Someone said their site was in a casino in Queens, so that was not conducive. They also say the good thing was the staff was very helpful and there were no long lines. Now, when we asked if they didn't vote early voting, how was the regular voting? So the regular voting, the cons were they took the voter guide and the card that was in the voter guide that was mailed to the home. And so it was easier. They just went to their EDAD and went 1, 2, 3. They did not have to stop at the information desk to find out what their EDAD was. So it would be good if you encourage voter to take the card out of the booklet and take it with them. Now, it was another couple shared that it was easy because they were told beforehand that it would be an e-book. Now, the folks who did not know it was going to be an e-book, when they got to the site to write on that e-book, they could not rest their arms. So their hands stood on the book. So you couldn't write sign your name to get your ballot. So it took a little while, and especially seniors had a problem writing on that e-book. I don't know if they could adjust it some more so that seniors can rest in order to write on the e-book. So that was a little problem. Now, the young folks, they were good. They just came in automatic. Some did not even just use their fingertips. Okay, so it was, technology. And another thing they found out was that the proposal on the back of the ballots, they were too small and were very lengthy. And so some folks did not really understood. They just went ahead, which was a yes or no, but they did not really get the gist because, again, they did not go through the guide to get a understanding of the e-board, the proposals on the back. And we do not know whose responsibility is to tell the voter when they receive their ballots to tell them they must flip the ballots. Okay, so that's information folks need to know to flip the ballot when there's proposal on the back. So that was, again, our consensus of our group about the early voting. And they can't wait till next year because early voting will be in April. So we're ready to spread the word. That'll be 10 days before the primary. And that the second one is in November, 10 days before the day of election, that early voting would be, implemented. So that was from my committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Next is Jocelyn Walters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Walters. I'm a member of the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Brooklyn. I also participate in Faith in New York on their committee around voter engagement. And then I'm also a member of the Upper West Side, so that's where I voted. So I thank you for having me. I thank Sean for also involving me in this. I've come and participated in the Get Out the Vote drives with my social justice ministry. Emmanuel Baptist Church has a social justice ministry that I lead, about 70 members, and one of our initiatives is voter engagement. And so I can talk a little bit about my personal experience, but I will focus mainly on the experiences that I've gathered from those organizations that I participate in. Also, similar to committee member Gerard, it was very seamless for me to vote on the Upper West Side. It was literally across the street from where I normally vote. I did use my voter card, so I whizzed right in, and it wasn't very crowded at all. I will say that on my entry, they had a accessibility ramp that was way too narrow it was almost too narrow for someone that was coming in who was in a wheelchair. Several people had to help her maneuver the corners. And I thought that could have been better executed. But other than that, I thought there were a lot of personnel that were present, very helpful. And one of my close friends, she also is a poll worker, and she had great things to say, and she worked a number of those days during the early voting. From my group experience, I would say there was some feedback. One issue was the complacency or lack of feeling of relevancy around voting still is persistent, including early voting, particularly in these off-cycle elections. For many people, I heard feedback like, why does it matter? There's just a few, random candidates. These ballot measures aren't important. And it was sad. Some of these people were prominent members of the community, in fact. So it was sad to hear that. I think committee member Udin, she mentioned that there should be more communication to stakeholders in the community, and I agree. My pastor made an announcement from the pulpit during early voting, but I think more people who are in charge of large groups of other people need to be sounding that alarm early and saying, hey, this is the time, go vote early, and sort of citing the reasons why it's valuable. So maybe there could be training just for those people, even if it's virtual, where it's sort of outlining what are the 3 or 4 things you can do as a community leader. And that way they come to their groups, congregations, and they're able to speak more eloquently about why this is important. The other thing is around information. I use the voter guide. I also had Sean send me a bunch that we passed out and handed out to our congregants. Some people did get it in the mail as well. And then I held a meeting for my social justice group where we went through the ballot measures. And I can tell you, we have lawyers, we have social workers, plenty of smart people, and all of us were like, what do you think this means? And I think that is a major issue, especially the way that a lot of our laws are written, where there are things tacked in that aren't part of the headline of the ballot measure. So you get this, but you're also signing up for these other things. That's important for people to unpack so that they understand that by voting for this one thing, which is the headline of the ballot measure, you're actually also signing up for these other things that you may not feel as strongly about. So if you don't understand what you're reading, it can be tricky to know what you're voting for. I did appreciate the way that the voter guide included pros and cons, but I think that could go further. I think people need more information in very layman terms, and maybe some examples of how these things will play out so that they can make much more educated decisions. I also appreciate the comment about social media promotion. I thought that the New York City Campaign Finance Board did do a lot, but we have to get down to issue level for people to feel like it's relevant. And then the last thing, So some of the things that we are working on to address this sense of disconnect for the coming up primary is having people spend that time understanding what the issues are, what's on their ballot, so that they can feel a sense of connection. I also did hear the feedback from folks that the locations for early voting were inconvenient, particularly in neighborhoods of color. And so that I felt for me, it was overly convenient. Like I walk by the polling location, it's literally across the street from where I normally vote. There was a bunch of signages outside. It was very nicely done. I just feel like, is that the same experience everybody else was having? And so some of the things that we're going to be doing leading into next year, we did this a few years ago, actually with Stephanie Zimmerman, who's here. We hosted a teach-in, and it was the idea was we wanted to have something objective just to talk about what's on the ballot and the offices, not the actual candidates. And I think that sort of level of creating connection so that people understand why they're showing up to vote would maybe help increase voter turnout. But overall, I loved early voting. I thought it was a great opportunity for people to work around schedules and to work around other commitments, and then also encourage them to look at the issues in the ballot early because they knew they could vote early. So unless there's any questions, that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.
DC 37 local 372 does not want to be polling machine or should be on the lunchroom.
Okay. So the next is Jan Cambopiano. I'm just totally, I'm completely.
372 DC 37 District Council 37 does not want polling machine or any machine should not be on the lunchroom, school cafeteria.
Okay. That's going to be, I think I think that Amanda brought that up, that a lot of the comments that happened about where they located, and this will be a challenge for the Board of Elections, is that there were a lot of complaints about the use of schools and the taking of facilities for children during a whole week, particularly lunchrooms where, So where where the children weren't able to have lunch in their lunchroom for a whole week, and that that's problematic. So I think that's going to be a big challenge for the Board of Elections as they expand their sites, because
they wrote me a letter. They sent, I know you are from Board of Election and Finance, taking care of this issue seriously. Get rid of lunchroom machine.
Okay. Sorry
I'm going to talk about that issue, actually.
Okay.
I'm Jan Campbell-Piano. I am on the executive committee for Brooklyn Voters Alliance. I want to say thank you for sending us the voter guide. We use that in voter outreach all throughout the fall, letting people know not just about early voting, but what's on the ballot. We do a lot of direct action and talking to people about what they're voting for and how they're voting. So I do want to address a few issues. One is the assigned locations. We talked a little bit about voter centers. The board is really looking into that. The problem is they basically have to take over a space for 12 days. 3 times in a year in 2020 and 4 times in Queens. It's very difficult. Schools, it is very disruptive. Next year will be even more disruptive. And so I am saying this on behalf of grassroots groups all throughout the city. Everybody who's in a position of power, like all of you on the board here, who could get local offices, local spaces to actually commit to this could work for the city. NYCLU did do some analysis about the location of the assigned polling spaces for early voting. It's great. One of the reasons why Manhattan had such high numbers is, hey, they were all accessible by transit. Why didn't the Bronx have great numbers? They were not accessible by transit. And in Brooklyn, a lot of them were in completely not good places. People in Red Hook had to go to Park Slope. They were not local. So we need to expand the number of spaces so we could have more of them. They could be smaller. So just putting it out here for all of you to be looking around your neighborhoods and what could be an accessible space, and letting the Board of Elections know they have a survey open on their website right now until the 17th that you could submit those locations to them. They will take them. And look, you can send them emails. They will reach out. Just really encouraging you to, so we don't have this issue with the schools, that you can do that. But it is about helping people vote, and them not being in convenient locations meant in Manhattan, in the whitest neighborhoods, it was like a 7-block walk. In Latino neighborhoods, it was a 20+ walk. 20-block plus walk. That's not acceptable in this city. We need to do better, and we need all of us to stand up for this. It was great that they had 61 sites, but Staten Island and Manhattan had the same number. Staten Island has like 1/5 the number of voters as Manhattan. This is not equitable, and I think we all need to take a really hard look at that. I was a poll worker. I worked at the site in downtown Brooklyn. And I do want to give a shout out. Everyone who was a poll worker for early voting actually got trained twice. The problem was the training that we experienced had to accommodate the e-poll book training. So the other part of the training was not as full. They kept the training at 4 hours. So time that would have been spent about voters' rights, about helping people with disabilities. I had to tell people, you can take the poll book off that stand and put it down so people could sign it. Those are the kinds of things that we could all help. We testified to City Council and to the state. But having all of you say that poll workers need more training, the reason people had such a great experience had to do with poll workers. People were excited. That's how things happen. It's like a retail transaction. We advocated for this policy. It's awesome. The Board of Elections did an amazing job making sure it happened. You guys did a fantastic job making sure people knew what was on the ballot. But what happened when people got to that polling space really had to do with poll workers. I think we really need to support people knowing what voters' rights are so they can protect them, knowing how to help people with disabilities, knowing how to make sure that people can vote without difficulty. And so I do think it will take all of us. And I just want to end with, we are coming up to an election year that is going to go through the roof for this city. There is a state law that says no one has to wait more than 30 minutes. We have never managed that in a presidential year in this city. We are not going to manage it next year. Let's just face it. But if we could do more about getting more sites, making sure they're at least borough-wide, it will be hard to do them citywide in the short term just because we have 5 million registered voters, not counting the 20,000 you guys are going to get and the 100,000 the city's going to get, tens of thousands other groups are going to get. That's really hard to a little bit more collaboration between the mayor's democracy office, the Board of Elections, and the Campaign Finance Board to make sure everybody is working together so we can make this a good voting experience for everyone. Thank you.
Okay. I was going to comment on what you said. I mean, I think that it's definitely true. I guess, one, I imagine, and I, didn't follow the Board of Elections testimony to the City Council, but I think some of the restrictions are, the accessibility, making sure that they have spaces that are accessible, and also the volume of poll workers needed for additional sites. So, those are probably our two limitations on expanding, greatly expanding. I have friends who live in California, and in California, they have poll sites everywhere. A friend of mine voted in her neighbor's garage. And so it's, I guess, thinking about those, how to accommodate that, because you're right. I think that there are big differences in the distances. I happen to live around the corner from Emmanuel Baptist Church, and our early voting site was, well accessible by mass transit, not in the neighborhood by any stretch of the imagination. And so, really thinking about that and making sure that there's at least sites within neighborhoods, what people think of as neighborhoods, even if it is 10, 15 blocks, it's like, I at least think of that as my neighborhood. I don't think of my neighborhood as downtown Brooklyn. That's where our site was.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, that is, so it's important, that kind of conceptualizing for people.
Yeah, I do want to clarify, there are enough poll workers. So if you went to an early voting site, you saw a lot of people. There were way too many people. Plus, there were poll workers who did not get to work early voting because of what the Board of Elections did. They had this great campaign that said, hey, you can make $2,800 if you sign up to be a poll worker. And so they got like 10,000, 15,000 more poll workers than they had the year before because people signed up to do it. A lot of people wanted to do it, but the board was really concerned, Amanda's point, that they do it well. And so they sort of tamped down expectations, and they only allowed people who said they could work every day. They only took people who came from their district leader or came through the Board of Elections and did some kind of funny business about signing up to be a Republican so they could be a poll worker, because we have to have bipartisanness. So there is enough poll workers, so that's not the problem. The boards did lower, they used to have like a requirement that would be like 5,000 square feet, and now they've lowered that. So if they can have more sites, the sites are going to be the biggest problem. That's why I'm putting it out here to everyone, and everyone who can hear me. If you have a site that you think will be good, please go on the Board of Elections website and put it in there so they can at least put it in the pool. They're going to really struggle to find this. So I think all of us who care about it, if we could contribute toward that, I think it will make a difference. But yeah, I think poll workers really want to work early voting. It was fun. It was, and it was good for a lot of people. It's just, we could have had more people if we had more sites. So I don't think people are the issue.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And the last person who signed up is Stephanie Zinnerman, but you also would like to, okay, so we'll call it. So Stephanie, do you want to? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Zinnerman, and I'm actually here representing 3 organizations today. I serve as chair of civic engagement for the Brooklyn NAACP. I am also the vice president of membership for my local Democratic club, the Vanguard Independent Democratic Association. And I am also chair of the age-friendly neighborhood of Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights, all of which were very active in the early voting process. So I'll be talking to you about what we've done. So as you know, the Brooklyn NAACP, part of the national organization, is one of the oldest and boldest civil rights organizations in the land. And we have, from our national office, a 2-pronged mandate, and that is voter registration and participation, and of course, census. And we've been doing a number of it since, I guess now we're in our 3rd year. So the midterm elections, the census awareness period. Now we're moving into the presidential. We'll be doing redistricting after that. And then the 5th year will be when the next midterm elections again. So that is basically has been our focus. as a result of that, we were in coalition with Left New York Vote, fought very hard for early voting. And during this period, we were able to connect 10 additional organizations to the coalition and help distribute over 12,000 pieces of literature just about early voting. In addition to that, we created our own literature just so that it would be neighborhood specific and people would pick it up because it either said Bedford-Stuyvesant or Crown Heights or Brooklyn, so that there would be pride around getting the vote out early. We took the opportunity to invite ourselves to churches and community-based organizations just to speak about the importance of civic engagement as a whole, but specifically using this opportunity to get people engaged in voting again. Because we were active, and I think some people know that I testified during the charter revision period, we tried to get as many people as possible focused in on the fact that we were changing our constitution, and that was going to impact the way that we operated in the city for some time. And so we held monthly conversations with branch members and community members about that. So we had a whole campaign around how to vote for the three initiatives. Well, we all know they passed. We know why they passed. And we just hope that people are now going to be engaged in making sure that what is now going to be implemented actually works. Ranked choice voting hasn't been implemented in a city as diverse as New York or as large. And so now that it's the law of the land, we'll do what we can to make sure that it works perfectly, but it wasn't necessarily our choice for this time around. And that was mainly because there's been so much changing in the way that we're with early voting and just voting in general. We just feel that the board was not quite ready to do just one other thing, especially in a year that is going to be full of new things. But that being said, it's the law of the land, and we're going to move over it. So some of the special events that we were engaged in, we did teach-ins. We were certainly at churches. We had sold to the polls that Sunday, the first Sunday of early voting, at 3 churches in Bedford-Stuyvesant. On Halloween, we ordered early voting candy, and we had a party in our Democratic Club, and so that was fun as well. So just a couple of other things that I just want to say about the NAACP, and then I'll move to the other ones. Coming this year, we are gearing up certainly for the census work, but we've partnered with the YMCAs in Brooklyn. And so we will be working to train youth organizers and partnering with them to host events throughout the year. Our next event is going to be at it's going to be Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, and we'll be hosting those type of events. Hopefully we'll be back to Emmanuel Baptist Church and other churches as well, just providing people with information about how they can get involved, but really the importance of them being involved on a local level and exercising their right to vote, and of course giving voice to those things that they think are important and can change their community. And so we're really looking forward to doing that work and making sure that April 25th, we have a great showing of people who are going to be at the polls. Well, actually before then, because that's the actual election day, but whatever the early voting days are going to be as we look to choose our nominees. So I'm going to move on to our Age-Friendly Neighborhood Initiative. The Age-Friendly Neighborhood Initiative is designed to focus on the needs of those who are 62 years of age and older, and their ability to age in place. And of course, being civically involved is one of those age-friendly attributes. And so a number of our seniors are poll workers. and they were very happy to work early voting. Early voting hours, and as well as just doing outreach beforehand. So they went to nursing homes and they went to senior centers and they talked to them about what was on the ballot and did a lot of education before election day. And of course, said to people, you can come early voting. And then once you come, guess who's going to be sitting at the desk there to greet you? The same person who came to see you to tell you about early voting. So they all basically enjoyed the experience. I think the only thing that I would say, of course, some wanted to work all 9 days and not just 3. So that certainly was there. But one of the other points that they made, they thought it was a great opportunity to have all the poll workers cross-trained because you're there for so many days. So instead of just working in the one position, that you could actually learn all of the different positions so that if people are sick or you end up with more voting sites, you have a more more efficient workforce, if you will. So that was one of the things they wanted to share. And so lastly, I'm going to just talk a little bit about our district and our district leaders and our Democratic Club. So as you all know, district leaders get to select the poll workers that are going to be working in their areas, and certainly, the sites. So when we first received the list for Bedford-Stuyvesant, well, for the 56th Assembly District, there were only 2 voting sites. One on the Crown Heights side of the district and one on the Bedford-Stuyvesant side of the district, which was ridiculous. But because of the relationship, we could call the district leader and say, this is not going to work in our district. We need at least another site. And we finally we received another site, but it was actually in Bushwick. So we ended up with 3, but it didn't really help at all because it was outside of the district. And even the people who lived on the borderline, that's not something that wasn't a place that, it's not a part of the regular voting offering. So very few people went there. The folks who did were not very happy about that. And so there needs to be some way that the district leaders who actually have this knowledge of, neighborhoods and voting patterns can also lend voice to making sure that the sites are places that make sense. When you have a library that's in the center of the district that a lot of people attend, the fact that wasn't an early voting location just didn't make any sense whatsoever to us. I know that I really want us to consider that and just consider what schools means to neighborhoods. Everyone is in a school at some point. You go there as a child, you're picking them up as parents and grandparents. A lot of civic events happen there. We should be able to figure out how we can utilize the rest of our district and our neighborhoods to kids to have exercise, use those big, beautiful gyms that we have that mostly are empty for them to have exercise so that we can use the gymnasium for voting. It's so important. It is the story that I tell people about how I came to love being civically engaged and being a triple prime voter. The fact that my parents came to, my elementary school first and then my junior high school to vote, twice a year during those, election periods. And I could go and stand in the booth with them and I could press the lever after we made the decision, is a part of my DNA. And because there's so many young people who are, in families that may not be as civically engaged for whatever reason, if we take this away, this visual, this experience, I don't know what's going to happen with us civically. Every time I see the chancellor, I'm having a conversation about how is Civic for All going in the schools, because I'm not really seeing much effort. But that's another thing. We'll organize about that on another day. So I say that to say, we've done such good work together. And there's some people in this room I just really want to say, I'll call you out. Just thank you for all of the great work that you've done to get us this far. Thank you all for your service. And let's continue to encourage people to use their voice to make this a better place for us all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did have one question. Stephanie? Stephanie?
Oh, questions. I'm sorry.
I just had one question for you.
Sorry about that. Yes.
I did see a lot of the work that you did, especially with Souls to the Polls. And to Ms. Udin's comments, I just wanted to say, how did that work for the NAACP? Did you find that it was more successful on the weekends, during the weekdays? Can you just tell me a little bit more about it?
So it's interesting. So I sent a list out to pastors that we had relationships with, and said this was the offering. So we immediately received information back that yes, we absolutely want to do this, and so one of the things I can tell anybody who's doing this, make sure that you speak to a trustee or the church secretary, not just the pastor, because he or she is going to forget about the commitment that they made. But what I will say is we were able to get a bus. And at one church, the other two had their own church vans. And it was really great that they allowed us to actually give a pitch, during service, and talk about the importance of it. So the week before, the pastor mentioned it. We showed up and gave information out as people were arriving. He spoke about it from the pulpit at some point, and then during their announcements, they allowed us to come back. So we all know those 7 touches are always they're necessary for any campaign. And so I think the places where we were able to do that, we were very successful, happy about that. I can't wait to look at the numbers and see how we did. But I definitely want to start next year a little earlier with them, so that, every church, we now have a blueprint about what works. So I'm looking forward to repeating that efforts. Then one other thing I forgot that we did do, at the early voting, the first day of early voting, there were NYCHA developments next to a couple of our polling sites. So we actually were outside with tables, giving out information and encouraging people to go across the street. So we were able to capture people in the supermarket and people coming out of their houses as well. So that's something that we would use again. Yeah, absolutely.
I know NAACP is doing a great job. They're trying to do at least get involved to the minority community and color also. I know that very well. But a couple of people called me from the Purchester Bronze.
Oh.
There is a NAACP representatives there.
Yes.
And when they did not get NAACP involvement to get people to know early voting is coming, they try to organize with the NAACP because they know NAACP is involved with the Campaign Finance Board. But finally they give up, they did not do because they did not get the NAACP. I have those documents with me. Then when they provide me every information, I call Staten Island NAACP. I have all the taxes here. They said, man, if you did not get anyone, I cannot help you. Organize, I'm talking about why I have all documents with me, because when people not to try to get any other organization, they try to get one of the Campaign Finance Board member, which is me. I represent 5 boroughs, which is everybody should be proud, and I am proud, all members.
Right.
Because minority community, they try to collaboration, coalition, to civic engagement, train the people, get involvement the people. I'm proud you're here, but make sure next time to be involved, get to people know each other, and to try to be involved with the Campaign Finance Board sincerely, with the community, with the coalition.
Okay.
Thank
Well, I will tell you exactly what I will do. I'm going to take your words to our state chair, which is Hazel Dukes, and I guarantee you she will take care of the Parkchester branch. We're
But on
branches.
Parkchester,
No,
Staten
and
Island also.
exactly.
you.
All I can speak for Brooklyn, but I guarantee you that Mrs. Dukes will take care of
Thank
the rest
you.
of the
Thank you. I'm
branches.
so
All right.
proud.
And
We
thank you
love to
very
work together. Every community needs to be each other.
absolutely.
We need to make a coalition to happen sincerely.
Absolutely.
Vote is important,
It's very important.
and one person is a big support.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you for all of the service, for serving on so many boards, and but I also want to especially thank you for bringing back a childhood memory of when I pulled the lever for Lyndon Johnson. So thank you.
Very good. Yeah, yes.
So we have one more person who wants to testify, and then I'll thank you. So Eddie.
Buenas noches, good evening. My name is Eddie Cuesta, and I am the Executive Director of Dominicanos USA, DUSA. First and foremost, I would like to thank the great partnership that we have with NYC Votes. Since we first started in 2014, we have been able up to today to register more than 165,000, and in New York alone, over 130,000. This year alone, we have been able to register approximately 6,108 voters. And we are very proud for the work that we are doing at the swearing-in ceremonies, citizenship event that takes place every Friday. And I'd like to give a shout out to Sean. We send 3 of our staff every Friday to 1 to 3 ceremonies. So many of you in the board, I think it will be very important if you could show up one day just to see, the joy of those people that become new citizens. And I just want to add that New York City has over 900,000 legal permanent residents that could apply to become U.S. citizens. So this is the work that we do is basically to promote empowerment through voter registration and citizenship. As we come across to many of the people that we encounter, many of them are not U.S. citizens, and although they've been living here for 20, 30 years. Under the environment that we live in today, this is a tremendous increase. As a matter of fact, the cost of becoming U.S. citizen will be increased from $725 to $1,170, plus the fee waiver will be eliminated. Just to give you an example, in September, we did a John Jay Community College in partnership with CUNY Citizenship Now. We processed over 610 applications. In September. In October, we did with the Bronx Borough President, the Bronx Borough President's Office, we did over 100 applications. So I think that what was mentioned by Eric and by Amanda in terms of how you're going to be approaching for 2020, 2021, will be very important to see if you could connect. I also will just give you a little example of what we did, or to show you a couple of the numbers that we did for early voting. Previous to selecting the sites, we had informed the Board of Elections, I think from the meeting that we held here and sometime, I don't know if it was in March, that we wanted to make sure that in some of those areas that we have worked so diligently in registering our community, that there will be some poll sites. I want to, really commend the Board of Elections first and foremost, because I think they did an excellent job. This is historic, in terms of, how people were greeted, in terms of putting together the event. But one of the things that we found was that when we did our phone banking, that some of the sites were very too far apart, and people just, decided to wait on election day. As well as just to mention that in north of Manhattan, we had a location up at 193rd Street, and the other one south was around 120th Street. So that was a very big gap. I'm in the Bronx. In the Bronx, we have been able to register more than 58,000 people. And the furthest south was 161st Street at the courthouse. So Mott Haven, our office is on 149th Street. So that was a problem. So I will imagine that we'll be working, all of us, to make sure that there will be more poll sites, in those particular communities. I would also like to say that I think the Board of Election is something very interesting because they had a barcode with the information that they send out. So when we monitor some of the poll sites, people were coming with the barcode with the information that was sent by the Board of Election. And I think that was very helpful because right away it popped up, in terms of providing the desk in the assembly districts. I also want to add that the ballots, as was mentioned previously, I think the font, was very too small. And again, we went through the fine print, in terms of making sure that perhaps, that could be promoted, and through our outreach, we made sure that we use the NYC Votes voter guide as a connection in terms of, what people should go to the sites, to the poll sites and vote on that particular day. And if we are able to provide information, more information in terms of the ballots, I think that will be very important. I also want to add that there is a new website that the Board of Election put out, which I think is very friendly. And, they should be commended because I think they're making a big turn in terms of the one, they want to do to making voting more accessible. DUSA made a moderate effort to mobilize registered voters for the November 5th, 2019 general election. Our phone banking was a bit smaller this year. Our operation we conducted between October 28th and November 5th. During the operations, we made 2,493 calls and successfully made contact with a whole series of voters. I could run down the numbers. I have, a little, a sheet that I put that together. But we also did, which was very helpful, and it was asked previously in terms of what is one of the best methods of contacting voters. We also did text banking to engage with voters from October 28th to November 6th. We texted close to 31,198 voters and sent out in terms of, twice or close to 71,600. These were unique voters that we make sure we selected. We have, one of the best database in terms of the collection of the information that we have out in the field. And many of them are new voters that we're putting into our system in terms of when we go to different community events. So that was very helpful in terms of mobilizing. This year, we didn't do door knocks. That's very expensive. But I just want to mention that for next year, I think we have to really provide a larger investment because in social media played a very important role. Anybody could go into our social media website, which is Yo Soy DUSA, but I want to say that Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, emails was very, successful in terms of, the investment that you could do in social media, which is a lot cheaper. Was mentioned some of the impressions. I was very surprised, and I commend, the work that NYC Votes and the communications department is doing, because that's the way, that we are engaged in our community. It's a lot better than phone banking. I think phone banking has been displaced. So the other suggestion that I have, I think that we should start looking in terms of providing other languages. We did and replicated the press release that was sent by NYC Votes for early voting. We made sure that we did it in Spanish and send it to all of the ethnic media that service our community, including Univision and Telemundo. So they are very anxious to get information. We have to look at the population of this city. I think in the area of what we are seeing at the citizenship swearing-in ceremonies and some of the events that we do, citizenship application, free citizenship application, there's a large community from Africa. There's a lot of different languages, that their dialects, so I think that's a very important community because we've seen the growth and they really want to participate, as well as Asian and other, minority groups. So that's basically what I wanted to just inform you of some of the work that we did. I am sure next year is going to be very challenging. We have an election for the borough president in Queens in February. We have the presidential in April, plus the census, which is going to be also very challenging. And then the federal election, and the general election. So, the work that your team is doing is extraordinary, continue, and we hope that we could continue to partner. I just want to add that based on the number of registration that we have done, there is a large percentage of millennials, 18 to 29, 30 years old. And something that we are working, besides, visiting some of the schools with a program that was started here, which was the Student Voter Registration Day, we are connecting and working to connect many of our young people through esports, okay? So this is something that we are exploring. I think most of our young people are very much involved in esports. It's something that is growing. It might be in the Olympics in the future. So they are all day, with computers, so we're trying to see how we could connect in educating them that how important it is for them to participate in the electoral process, register to vote, become U.S. citizens, because there is legislation that could affect that particular industry down the road, and I think they could play a major role. So we have to find messages, that really could connect to our young people. That is the future. In terms of how we mobilize them. So it's not just saying, register to vote. They will probably do it, but they will not get out, on the election to get out to vote. There's too many elections. They don't care. The elected officials are not doing anything. This is the comments that you get. So if we are able to engage them in things, in terms of legislation, scholarships, bringing them over to a field that they could, study technology. So this is what we have to look at in terms of the future of the city of New York and basically the participation of voting registration. So thank you, and keep up the good work. If there is any question, I'll be open to.
Thank you.
No? Sure. Thank you.
Can I ask one quick question? Did you say that has it in fact been established that there's no longer going to be a fee waiver for people applying to become naturalized citizens?
Presently, on the December 2nd, now, they are not accepting the mean test that accept, the taxes, but there is in the process of being most likely that will be eliminated. So, those are one of the things that we are making sure, asking a congressional representation to really, provide comments to the USCIS. But right now, the law, that December 2nd, everything changed with, anybody that could apply for the fee waiver, they need to provide proof of income. And before, they used to accept the mean tested, somebody that was getting Medicaid, Medicare. So we had a large percentage of people that were applying. So, that's something that is very concerning. Apart from, increase of price from $725 to $1,170.
But I just want to understand, this wasn't legislation that was passed because the House
No, there's no legislation.
This was done by
This is
regulation.
for USCIS, it's under the present administration that is making it a lot harder for people to apply for citizenship. The waiting period in New York, it's a year and about 18 months before you could get a notice, so it's going to be harder. So, those are the things that it's important to educate our community. So, you got to prepare them more when they take the exam. We have just started doing a partnership with the New York Historical Society, which is doing an extraordinary work by providing the civic classes through actual artifacts. We have opened up our office. They have been doing an excellent job, in terms of helping those people that are applying, to pass the exam. Because once you pay $1,170 and you fail 10 questions, the questions, then you have to do it over again. So, that's the challenge that we have here in not only in the city, but, throughout the country, for people that are eligible. In the country, according to the estimate of USCIS, there's 10 million people that are going to apply to become U.S. citizens. And that's growing in numbers on a yearly basis. So that's the challenge that we have. So we have to continue making sure that our community is able to, get out and vote and make it easy for them to vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say one thing, because I was nervous. I just want you to know that we have a strong partnership with Sean, and we participate, get out the vote, because I'm also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and so we trust him, and he's so efficient. When we needed the early vote cards, I just came down, he had it ready for me. So he's doing an excellent job. He even gets us to volunteer to come and make telephone calls. So I must say that he's very, very, very attentive, very reliable. And I must say, a big thank you to our organization. Look forward to partnering with them. You just have to send us the email, and we're going to get a couple folks at least to participate because he's awesome.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi, my name is Eleanor De Palma, and I'm the former executive director of the Language Access Program at DOT. And I have a lot of experience with language, and I've worked with Odin on translation. And I want to just respond to some of the points that were made about the material that is distributed, the voter guide. I've been doing this work for many years, and there's a thing, I'm sure everyone knows about plain language, right? But I think many people don't know that plain language has developed for the past 50 years. So many people think that plain language is, okay, I take a document and just, revise it for readability. It's much more than that. And I recommend that the material that is distributed to the voters go through a rigorous evaluation that includes usability testing. And that means that someone, because it really should be done, because most of many of the folks in our population across the United States can read and understand language or English or any other language at a very, believe it or not, an elementary level, like 4th, 5th grade reading level. So there's no point in wasting money and publishing these voter guides if no one can understand them. And, and I'm talking about not only the words, but the font, right? That was mentioned before. The font size, even the look of the voter guide. It could be daunting. You could say, oh, look at that. That's so much to read. I'm not going to, am I going to read it? That's the first thing. And then if I read it, am I going to understand it? So what happens is a usability testing is where a plain language expert would go in and revise the document, right? And look at the design of it and say, is it appealing? Would someone want to read this? And then they revise it. So it's very plain, very easy to read. And so they understand it. And then they put it through a testing where they give that document to people who are going to be reading it. These are the voters. Do they understand it? What do they understand? What do they not understand? The before and the after. They give them the before, right, or how it is now, and then that revision. And then they get feedback. So this is really a what we call in research, a human-centered approach that speaks to not only comprehension, but also the feel about the document, right? We can have a feeling about reading that document, and that really makes a difference. So getting the feedback from the public, do they understand it? Why communicate if we're not going to have effective communication, right? So that's the point I wanted to get across. And I think we started it at DOT, but there's a lot more work that we need to do. Taking it to that level of usability testing, I think, is really, really going to make a difference. And it is a cost. The next question is, well, who's going to pay for this, right? How are we going to approach it? I guess it would be the Board of Elections. It would be all of us, right? Where our tax money is going. So that's a decision that would, again, be a political, usually goes back to politics, political decision, how's the money going to be spent? But I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor to take plain language to the full length of what plain language has evolved into, so that we know the public understands what they're getting in their hands.
Can I just ask you a question about that?
Yes.
Is it different? How I phrase this. So I can understand English. I don't know a foreign language, but is it a different process for different foreign languages? So I mean, so you have different experts who do this, and I imagine that if you're translating into Chinese or Korean,
exactly, that's a perfect question. In fact, that pertains to, the 2 points in response to that, 2 points. One is that if your English is plain, then it's going to be easy to translate, right? Then it's going to be easy to translate. But then when we translate, usually that's another issue that, falls in line with, our material, our translated material. Many of the vendors who translate for the city, because it goes back to profit, money, goes back to money always, they outsource to companies or people in various countries. So the translation is not really based on the U.S. Language, because there is U.S. Spanish, and then there's Spanish from Puerto Rico, there's Spanish from Colombia, and all the other Spanish-speaking countries, right? Same thing for India, Bengali for the Eastern languages, and for all the other languages. So it depends on where it's called localization. So that's a whole. So that's why at DOT we started that process at DOT where we review the translations that are done by the vendor, by these global big companies. They send it out to wherever for the translation. So we have to make sure that translation is correct, is accurate, and we've been very successful at that. But without that review process, it's not going to be a quality translation. But we started a study. Actually, I wrote a study proposal to do research on plain language in Spanish. So that involves a lot of involves developing a corpus, doing a linguistic research, and also adding layers of surveys to find out, does the public understand this now that we decided what level, of register in the language that they can understand. And now we're going to develop a glossary where we know that we're sure that the public understands these Spanish words in plain language.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had one statement to make. Thank you so much for saying that statement. It's funny because I was just reading today that, first of all, we know that the ballot initiatives, the language was very long. In some cases in the English language, it was over 500 words. But when it was translated into Spanish, it was like 2,100 words.
It was very long, yes.
It was extremely long. And I don't even
yes.
want to consider what it was in some of the other characters, some of the other languages. So that's definitely something that's really important that I believe that we'll be looking into.
Yes, that is it's called word swell. Word swell. So it happens in Spanish. It happens in other languages as well, Russian as well. And so that's where plain language comes in, where plain language experts will look at the design. And as someone who is fluent in the language, it has to be someone who knows the language, who can make those changes in the design. Because if you have a word swell, that changes the design of the document. But that is an issue. Yes, it makes a difference. So I highly recommend qualified language not only translators but plain language experts who can look at our documents that are distributed to the public.
I mean, we do both the translation and quality assurance to make sure that the translation is quality. I think part experience is that the technical terms are, hard to translate into some other languages.
Yes.
And so they, making sure that they're understandable,
Yes.
In all the different languages. But I think Sabrina has something to add to this.
I just have a quick question about logistics, the usability testing.
The usability, yes.
What's the time frame?
Well,
Say you have something, it goes through that research process. What's that time frame for it to come back?
well, I think depending on how many people you'd like to put the testing through, like if we start with English, we could of course start with English, and it depends on how many people you would want to put through the process. So maybe 50, 100 people, a sample of folks, and it might take, I would say at least, and depending on the size of the document, maybe at least 6 months, at least several months. Yeah, it would have to, because the document would have to be analyzed and then revised. And the document would have to be, of course, whoever wrote the document, there would be a lot of conversations back and forth, before the revision to know. So the experts in that text who wrote the text, And so there would be a lot of conversations before it even got to the point where it would be put through testing. And then, of course, once it comes back from testing, they actually do videotape. The usability testing involves videotaping. So we actually see the response on video of the person reading this document before and reading the revised document. So you actually see the behavioral response of the person taking in the information. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there other people who have comments, want to give testimony? Questions?
Sorry, I was so late. So I'm not going to read my testimony.
Okay.
Because I don't know what everybody else said.
Use that.
Oh, sorry. Okay, my name is Catherine Gray. I serve as co-president of the League of Women Voters. It's a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active voting and the transparency of the voting process. Plus, in addition, I was a poll worker for the last 10 years, a coordinator for the last 7, and I worked 7 out of the 9 days of early voting, as well as the general election. So I had the big sweep. So I want to commend the Board of Election again. I think they pulled it off. I think they did a very good job in the time and in sort of the chaotic manner that it seemed to be coming out. And I equate you guys supporting them, the good government groups that were supporting them and pushing out the information. I know that we are part of a big...
I'm concerned that people may not be able to hear you. Could you speak closer to the microphone?
Okay. Yeah. We were part of a larger organization of New York Vote, Let New York Vote, early voting, Brooklyn Alliance of Voters, plus the League. We were all working on the same page to get the information out. But I wanted to get to the things that I would like to think about for the 2020 elections, because everybody seemed to be, 95% of the people that answered our 403 surveys questionnaires loved early voting, thought it was wonderful, the best experience they ever had. But we had problems with poll workers who, instead of referring to the voter ID card, the voter card that we get from the Board of Election as a voter ID card, and too many poll workers said, I need to see your ID, and people were pulling out their driver's licenses. Too many. And we need to get a snappy name for that little card so they don't call it a voter ID. The biggest problem.
Can you ask her?
Yeah.
I'm confused. You don't need to present an ID to vote, so I don't.
But they sent out this little folder, and it said that bring this card because you'll take a shortcut to the lines. The lines will be shorter if you use this card.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
Yeah, and it was sort of like when you get your voter card way back when. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, well, it was, I kept telling people, please put away that driver's license. We could get arrested. The biggest problem I saw was the problem with electricity, the demand for electricity. Almost all, I think all 61 of them had to have a generator. I know in my general poll site, I have 2 outlets in the building, one on either side of the gym. So that's 4 places. I have 4 printers, a BMD machine, and then I had the electronic poll books that needed to be charged during the day. And I came close using the batteries and switching things quickly around, running out of power on the general election day. So either they give me more batteries or more extension cords. And for the future, one electronic poll book per ED is not going to be enough. Every ED should have 2 at the minimum, because I had lines in my Park Slope polling place. At times I had 5 to 10, and one time I had 25 people standing in line because there was one electronic poll book per table. Anyway, so, and we need to find, definitely for early polling sites, we need to find some other places and schools. I don't know if a lot of that was brought up because April and June primaries are right in the middle of testing season, math in April and regents in June. So they recommended public libraries, post office, college, universities, and commercial spaces. Barclay Center, the Javits Center. But I think the problem was it was too late to ask these groups to, provide space. So do you have any questions? I have the formal testimony for you to read later.
Yep. Thank you. That's
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, okay. Okay.
When I first started, I had 4, but they are so excited about the voters registration that they'll be able to register to vote early next year. So they're really keen on that. I do want to say that the language, and I have to go with some of what I heard, the language is not quite understandable for the youth. And what we do is we do door knocking, we do registration drives, and we do whole educational meetings. And thanks to Sabrina and Sean, my youth are well educated, and when they're not, we get the information. We've been trained by them, so they are well educated. But it's very difficult for them to explain to their peers on not who to elect, but what does it mean, what position they hold, who is who, who does what, how do they do it, and that's really confusion to the youth. So what happens is it discourages them, so they don't want to be bothered because they don't understand. They can't. That don't mean anything to them. And I'm purposely speaking as they speak because this is how I relate to them. So they don't understand it. They are very excited about it, and I don't know the process of being what qualifies a site to be a polling site, but NYCHA has resident association leaders that has spaces, large spaces. Some have large, some have small. It would be an honor for the youth to be able to say, come downstairs. We right downstairs. It would be honorable for them to knock on the door to bring the senior in the wheelchair down the stairs or across the street. If they have to go, I'm going to say 5 blocks from where they live at, they're discouraged. And then I'm going to go a little deeper, and I'm going to be finished. NYCHA has sometimes this territorial thing where locations are not allowed, and other locations I've been working with the authority for over 20 years, working with the youth. And there's situations where they can't go to the other locations. So this will stifle them from moving the 5-block radius. So I just want to put out there, when you're thinking about the language and you're thinking about the polling sites, consider the youth and their restrictions and their being able not to understand the paperwork. But they are very excited. And they are very excited that they're going to be able to register to vote early. So I just want to throw that out there to keep that in mind, that the youth are participating. When I first started, I had 4. I have 12 to 15.
That's great.
Because of the voter registration.
Right. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
About the polling sites, I think it's so true.
we don't have to just rely on just city or, Department of Education schools. What about colleges?
And then
What about colleges?
And then you got your senior centers, you got your
Yes.
community centers,
Yes.
you got your resident association rooms. And then
Exactly.
you have, I don't know the process, NYCHA has a lot of locations in their areas.
Yes.
We can't utilize those.
A lot of real estate.
Yes,
A
I
lot of
mean,
real
we only want to borrow it, we don't
Yeah.
have it. We just want to borrow it.
Yeah.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
But I remember one hearing, I was so impressed. There were youth, it was right here. And there was so many youth in that room, and it was so refreshing. And I thought, these are college age youth. And why not have them in the colleges? I mean, CUNY has schools all over the city. That I think is a good suggestion too, in addition to NYCHA.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. A lot of feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to say, the reason why we use folks don't understand what the positions are.
Yes.
And the education, sometimes the education for the youth, they're not educated on what's happening. They're not realizing that this little thing that you didn't do affects what you want to do. So it's just educating you. Find a way to kind of educate them. I heard somebody talk about a summit. I think that's great. NYCHA does a summit every year for the youth that participates in the YLC, what we call it a youth council. I think a summit is great. An educational summit is even greater for the youth. Just put it out there.
And while she's speaking for the youth, I want to say the sticker that the Board of Election gave out to the little kids who came with their parents was awesome. It said, "I'm a future voter." And I think that was really great because first we used to give the big sticker to the little kid that said, "I just voted," and they did not vote it. So the sticker that says, "I'm a future voter" is awesome for the children.
Because when I do a voters registration drive, right, the parents come up to the table, the little people are saying, "I want a sticker, I want a pin," and again, I have to give them the sticker that says, "I'm a registered voter."
I'm a future voter.
There are many.
Sir, did you want to?
Yeah.
Well, piggybacking on what you said about the schools. Now, when I was a kid in school, we had mock elections every year. It was the president, the governor, mayor, whatever. We had mock elections. So therefore, we learned politics as a kid in school, which I think is apparently missing right now. But anyway, I'm the president of Staten Island branch NACP, and we had this election, this early election. Now, we had the election for civic court judge on Staten Island. There's only one civic court judgeship on Staten Island. I was somewhat annoyed, or perhaps not quite understanding why all ballots and all districts did not have the same candidate. When you had different candidates in different districts, that kind of annoyed me because I was not able to vote for my candidate of my choice. Now, the board of elections on Staten Island said that's to be taken up by the board of elections in New York City here. Do you have any feedback on that?
I mean, we can look into it. I'm not familiar with this. We don't have anything to do with printing the ballots, but we can talk to the Board of Elections about that. I'm not sure why that would happen. If there's only one candidate, why would there be different candidates in different districts? But we can inquire about the.
Also, you mentioned changes to charter commissions, right? Changes of charter. Now, we had a hearing on Staten Island. It was very poorly advertised. There was 3 people attending that at the College of Staten Island. 3 people all Staten Island. Now, the hearing started at 6:30 in the evening. People still coming home from work at 6:30. So I don't know what they expected as far as attendance is concerned, but there was only 3 people there, which was pretty much a disgrace, really. So I don't know if you're.
We also don't. They're not the charter vision. We explained. I mean, that is, it's a good point. It's like making sure that we set hearings at a time.
Yeah. Is the advertising so poorly done, and why 6:30 in the evening when people still shopping for work. We're a borough, most folks work in New York City, and they're still coming home at 6:30 at night. So with that, they are pretty much being disenfranchised. So you're the wrong party to entertain that, but still in order to properly face. But anyway, we do vote election voters work every year, and I myself do poll watching. Free. I don't get paid for it. We get up in the morning, we open the polling site up, and we go back and forth all day along the different polling sites, making sure everything's running smoothly. And we close the polling site down at night. We get a count of all the ballots that were turned up for each candidate. So that's what we do. And we give candidates forums every year. I mean, I've been involved in candidates forums, I guess, for 30 years or more probably. So we do stay pretty active in the process of elections.
Well, thank you very much for all your work and thank you for your comments. Okay. Are there other comments, questions? Committee members?
Thanks to all of you for being here. It's I'm really in awe of the amazing work that all of you are doing, and thank you.
Thank you especially to the staff.
So, thank you.